From the headquarters of Telesur here in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Carla Gonzalez. Venezuela's National Electoral Council has set April 22nd as the date for the presidential election. The announcement came just hours after talks with the Venezuelan opposition in the Dominican Republic collapsed. One of the main points of disagreement in Santo Domingo was the election date, with the opposition asking for the vote to be held in June. It is still not clear which opposition parties will take part.
Nos comprometemos.
We commit, as always, to guarantee all democratic conditions so that any difference during this coming electoral process can be solved through the people's vote, so that their voice, sacred and absolute, can be heard and that the people of Venezuela can decide our fate. We commit to the people of Venezuela and with everyone that has contributed to this collective effort. The National Electoral Council has been in permanent session since Monday and has analyzed a possible election date. Today, we have decided and we call for the presidential election to be held on April 22nd.
Let's go to our correspondent, Freddie Gillingham, with the latest from Caracas.
So Venezuela's presidential elections of 2018 will officially be taking place on April 22nd. This was officially confirmed by the National Electoral Council at around 7:30 p.m. in the evening of Wednesday. It comes just after dialogue between the opposition and the government came to no fruition. No agreement was signed by the opposition. However, a government delegation flew back to Caracas on Tuesday evening, having declared that they had signed their part of the agreement. Whether the opposition are going to be going forward in these polls with a single candidate to run remains to be seen. We know that the Venezuelan government have put forward as their only candidate Nicolas Maduro. We'll just have to wait and see how the opposition react to this date. We can definitely predict that they probably wanted this election to take place a lot later, as they are looking quite fractured at the moment. Campaigning is set to be beginning on April the 2nd. We will be bringing you direct updates from across the country in the lead up to that date.
That was Freddie Gillingham from Caracas. And as we heard from him, the dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the opposition was suspended indefinitely on Wednesday. The president of the Dominican Republic, Danilo Medina, who had been hosting the talks, said it had not been possible to get both sides to sign a document that contained the points which had already been negotiated.
President Nicolas Maduro has expressed his desire to continue dialoguing, even telling me that he is prepared to implement all of the agreements included in the document that the government signed yesterday, even without the signing of the opposition. The opposition has asked that we not close the doors of dialogue, that we leave a window open to continue working. We from the Dominican Republic and the accompanying countries are always in favor of dialogue. We understand that the path for Venezuela's reconciliation can begin with agreements which can be reached at a negotiation table.
And the Venezuelan government has published in full the agreement it signed in the Dominican Republic, but which the opposition refused to sign. It includes a series of electoral guarantees as well as a proposal to work jointly with the opposition-controlled National Assembly and opposition to sanctions against Venezuela. President Nicolás Maduro said he will be prepared to implement it even without the opposition.
I spoke to the President of the Dominican Republic, Danilo Medina, and President Danilo asked me for something for the agreement, and I said, I agree, it's okay, I concede these points. You have my word, and I'm going to respect all parts of this agreement, and I hope that part of the opposition will have a think about this. I have given precise instructions to Communications Minister Dr. Jorge Rodriguez so that we give all the electoral guarantees to all the candidates who register, so that all the international commissions come in coordination with the electoral power, a point that was established in the agreement.
For the government of Bolivia, the last round of dialogue allowed both parties to reach a pre-agreement and a consensus on the presidential election date. This was emphasized by Foreign Minister Fernando Guanacuni.
We achieved consensus on more than 95% of everything that the government and the opposition brought to the table. This pre-agreement was signed by all of us involved in the dialogue. The opposition and the government signed the pre-agreement. Dominican President Danilo Medina and its foreign minister, former Prime Minister Rodríguez Zapatero, the international observers except for Mexico. We signed a pre-agreement that showed great process. One thing that was missing was to agree on the election date. Before this last meeting, we agreed on the 22nd of April. We had a general consensus that allows to call for an election.
The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been in Jamaica on the final leg of a regional tour focused on stepping up pressure on the Venezuelan government. Tillerson said on Wednesday that Canada, Mexico and the U.S. have agreed at a trilateral meeting to study whether to impose sanctions on Venezuelan oil. He also told Prime Minister Andrew Holness that Jamaica is the United States' closest ally in the Caribbean, and that's why it was the only Caribbean stop on his tour. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza is heading to Trinidad and Tobago as he continues his tour of Latin America and the Caribbean. Arreaza was in Suriname on Wednesday, and he has been traveling throughout the region as a counter to the tour of U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. He met President Desi Boutet, who said he believes in keeping the peace.
In all countries, we try to live in peace, keep this kind of region as a peace zone. At the same time, we do believe in solidarity with each other, and in this moment of time when things are, let's say, very difficult, we have to use our everything we have and be very innovative to try and solve the problems.
And now with our correspondent Rolando Segura, who is traveling with the Arreaza and sent us this report from Paramaribo.
Sí, en efecto, el canciller de Venezuela, Jorge Arreaza.
The Venezuelan Foreign Minister, Jorge Arreaza, is continuing this tour for what he calls the diplomacy of peace through various Latin American and Caribbean countries. And he's now here in Suriname, where he's meeting here with the Speaker of the National Assembly. Earlier, he was at the presidential palace, where he met Suriname's president, Desiree Bouterse, to explain firsthand the situation in Venezuela and the development of the dialogue with the opposition. On that subject, President Bouterse said how important it was to ensure peace in Venezuela for all the countries of the region, and he expressed support for President Maduro's determination to keep seeking peace.
That was Rolando Segura from Suriname. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Informal housing neighborhoods in Puerto Rico have grown after Hurricane Maria hit the island in September of last year. and people are waiting for a response from the government. Authorities are trying to keep illegal buildings from flourishing in Hurricane Maria's wake, but there's no clear solution. Maria destroyed an estimated 472,000 homes, and most of its victims lack insurance to rebuild their properties. A 16-year-old indigenous girl has died in the region of Chocó in Colombia after military forces bombarded the area on January 30th. Our correspondent Lorena Hoyos has more.
Yesterday, the 16-year-old indigenous girl who was hurt during bombing by military forces in Chacpientordo in the Chocó department died. Her medical team said that she lost part of her limbs, and then sadly she died. We went to the area and talked to the indigenous people and with the Afro-descendant community living close to the area about the impact that this had on them. The bombing took place in an indigenous reserve and close to the river Tordo, an essential space for the livelihoods of these communities, where they grow crops and fish to feed their families. Now the communities are afraid to go in the area because they believe another attack could happen. They told us that after the attack, young people from the area were taken by the police and were accused of being insurgents, and the community had to defend them and push for their release. They also told us that throughout the ceasefire between the government and the ELN, they were living in peace, a peace that was broken by this attack. They are afraid, and there is uncertainty in the communities that continue to live here. They say they have been abandoned by the Colombian government and only see its presence through military actions. They say they never see education or medical brigades coming to help people. They wonder what will the future be. They are clear on one thing: they don't want a war or military actions that would put them in the center of the conflict, and they don't want to be displaced like the Hunan people. We'll be back with more details.
That was Lorena Hoyos from Colombia. And former Colombian President Álvaro Uribe has been accused of being involved in 2 paramilitary massacres. Medellin's Supreme Court has requested an investigation to be opened against former President Uribe over his alleged involvement in the massacres in 1998. The court presented testimonies of several ex-paramilitaries and survivors that affirmed the murders took place on a farm belonging to the family of the former president. Evo Morales' wide social base is preparing for a day of countrywide mobilizations in support of his run for a 3rd term as president. For more on this, we have a report from Freddy Morales in Bolivia.
Social organizations, which constitute the social base of the government of Evo Morales, announced simultaneous mobilizations in the country's largest cities on the 21st of this month. The mobilizations will express their support for the possibility that Evo Morales may run as candidate for re-election in 2019. On the same day, the 21st of February, the political opposition is organizing mobilizations against the postulation of Evo Morales for re-election. This is an issue already decided on by the Constitutional Court, which at the end of last year, by way of resolution, declared his candidacy for a 3rd term legal. The opposition has included the OAS in a campaign to nullify the Constitutional Court's decision. According to the government, there is a campaign of lies on social media, which resulted in a negative outcome for the opposition. For these reasons and more, the 21st of February has become notorious in this country.
That was Freddy Morales from La Paz. And Bolivia has announced a state of emergency as the country grapples with deadly storms. So far, at least 8 people have been killed and 50,000 families have been left homeless. About 33,000 fields have also been submerged. The most recent flooding happened in central Bolivia when the Taquina River burst its banks. The government has vowed to help people rebuild their homes and livelihoods. Activists in Mexico City have criticized the handling of femicide cases, saying that they are not being properly investigated. Our correspondent Pablo Perez has more details.
Mexico City has almost 9 million people, and 52% of them are women. Most are concerned about the increase of femicide cases during the last years, but they doubt that the official numbers tell the full story.
The figures keep changing, so we don't know what the reality is. We just have to trust what we hear on the news.
Many local news outlets repeat the numbers released by the government. Several organizations have criticized a lack of transparency from the authorities that investigate the crimes.
They hide information. They say these crimes are suicides or homicides, but we know that they are actually femicides.
But besides recording the numbers, Salguero said, there is a responsibility from the Special Prosecution Office to make sure that the perpetrators are prosecuted.
Data from the prosecution's office show that in 4 years, 576 women have been murdered in Mexico City. But this office only investigated 237 cases as femicides. That means only 36% of the cases were investigated as femicide, so the real numbers are hidden.
People have pointed out that even public cases, like the one of Victoria Salas, have not been properly investigated.
Victoria
was killed in September, and it was obvious that it was femicide. They found her at Talplan Hotel. It has taken 5 months for her case to reach the Special Prosecution Office for femicides. This shows complete indifference.
Mexico City has pioneered criminalizing gender violence and investigating these cases as femicides. But some say that this achieves nothing if it does not result in prosecutions.
Brazil's Central Workers' Union has announced a national day of protest against pension reform on February 19th. The provisional reform is being pushed by the government of Michel Temer. This action could be extended until February 23rd. Organizers say the measures will be particularly harmful to workers. They are rejecting the proposals following a session earlier this month, where changes to a pensions amendment in the Constitution was discussed. It was agreed that the government would vote on the issue after the Carnival holiday on February 19th. Also in Brazil, former President Lula da Silvas and its lawyers can now submit evidence in relation to his prison sentence. The defense will have until the 20th of this month to do so. The Federal Regional Court published the judgment against Lula in its entirety so that the lawyers will be able to present their evidence. Given the unanimous conviction, the defense may only submit the so-called declaration embargoes, which can call for clarifications on the judgment but not reverse it. After presenting evidence before the court, lawyers may also present to the Superior Court of Justice and the Federal Supreme Court. Mayan communities in Guatemala are celebrating the first anniversary of the departure of Spanish company Hydro Santa Cruz S.A.
The communities from Barillas municipality, Huehuetenango, celebrate the definitive cancellation of the hydroelectric project Cambalam. A victory comes after a social struggle which started back in 2012.
We are celebrating a historic moment, crucial for us because the death of this company, Hydro Santa Cruz, gives us hope to keep living.
For 4 years, the Spanish company, subsidiary of Hidralia Ecoener, tried to build a hydroelectric plant despite the community's resistance. On December 22 of 2016, Hydro Santa Cruz said they were giving away the rights that the state gave them for the Cambalam project. Although the company left the city, the inhabitants say that they are still suffering from the wounds they left behind.
There
are arrest warrants pending. There is also a criminal proceeding that is pending. In the year 2012, Andrés Pedro, an activist, was murdered.
The town of Barillas Huehuetenango was a landmark, according to social activists, because it strongly defended its natural surroundings.
We want to tell the state that as long as that indigenous people are organized, as long as the indigenous people exist, we are going to defend life. We're going to defend the natural assets.
The Mayan communities, Cuajan Yobales, are now demanding the township to build its own power plant for its people.
We don't want companies hurting us, but that doesn't mean we don't want development. We don't want the fake development that they are offering us. We want it to develop here.
Hydro Santa Cruz was the only license granted by the Ministry of Energy and Mines in the town of Barillas Huehuetenango. With its dismissal, there aren't any more hydroelectrical projects.
Cuban independent media have said they want nothing to do with a new Trump administration initiative to create more U.S.-controlled media outlets on the island. The U.S. State Department announced the creation of a Cuba Internet Task Force in January to look at, quote, opportunities for expanding Internet access and independent media. The United States already channels money to alternative media in Cuba, and the government has branded the new initiative as subversive.
The situation with alternative media is twice as grave. We're not just talking about something that would magnify tensions in the country's political situation, but a move that could damage the credibility of an independent media.
I think it's much easier now for Cuba, for the government, for the youth, for independent media to maintain such an openly aggressive standing. We reject this attempt at interference in our politics, in Cuba's internal affairs.
Cuba has given a visa to a senior American diplomat to lead the U.S. Embassy in Havana. According to a U.S. official, it's an indication that both nations want to keep open lines of communication despite a sharp deterioration in relations since President Donald Trump took office. The diplomat, Philip Goldberg, will take the post as chargé d'affaires within days. Antigua and Barbudas' lower house has passed a drugs bill allowing households to have up to 4 cannabis plants. Cannabis is used by a large section of the population, according to Prime Minister Gaston Brown, and 70% of the population is in favor of decriminalization. The bill now moves to the Senate and Gazette, where it would likely become law. The lawmakers have begun to discuss how legalization will affect the tourist industry and cannabis for medicinal purposes.
Marijuana, utilized in different forms, has significant medicinal benefits, and certainly will move pretty quickly to ensure that we legalize the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes.
We'll take one last short break. Join us after a look at what our multimedia team is reporting.
You! Trump, God bless Trump, we're gonna nuke you guys. You, you, you. You're ugly and you have a flat face and an ugly nose. Put your hands on me one more time.
Run your mouth. Go back to
Listen,
Mexico.
I said, excuse me.
Go back. Wherever you're from.
We're gonna kill all of you. We're gonna kill every one of you fucking Muslims.
You're fat. You can't do anything.
It has nothing to
You
do
can't
with
your country.
Okay.
Because when I see you, I see that you are black and I see that you're not white.
Really?
So you are not like the rest of us.
Oh.
God help us.
Welcome back. Now let's have a look at some other stories from around the world.
Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. Senate have reached an agreement for government spending worth $300 billion for the next 2 years. The deal still needs to be approved in both the chambers of the Congress. If passed, this will avert government shutdown like last month.
It's been a painstaking and months-long process. It has required concessions, sometimes painful, by both sides. But at the end of the day, I believe we have reached a budget deal that neither side loves, but both sides can be proud of.
U.S. President Donald Trump wants a military parade in Washington similar to the Bastille Day parade in Paris. He expressed his wish in a recent meeting with the Pentagon officials, according to the Washington Post. Many have criticized the idea, including the mayor of Washington, who said just like the wall, he will have to pay for it. North Korea has staged a military parade just a day before South Korea inaugurates the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. In a show of strength, thousands of soldiers paraded at Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang. Unlike their last parade in April 2017, state television did not show the event live. There has been speculation ahead of the Olympics over possible talks between North Korea and the United States, but the North says there will be no such talks. South Korean President Moon Jae-in's office has said that he will meet North Korea's delegation, including Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong. Her inclusion in the delegation is seen as an important step from the North in improving relations with the South. Yo-jong is the first member of the ruling family from the North to visit South Korea since the end of the Korean War. The trial of Paris attack suspect Salah Abdel Salam has resumed in Brussels for a shootout with police in March 2016. Abdel Salam, the only surviving suspect in the November 2015 attacks in Paris, refused to attend the court hearing. The court had to begin proceedings without him as lawyers presented his case.
The judge in the New York trial of Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman has ruled the identities of the jurors will be kept secret. The prosecution had called for jury protection, citing Guzman's use of hitmen for more than 2 decades. Guzman was extradited to the U.S. in January last year. He pleaded not guilty to running an international drug trafficking operation. His defense team says today's ruling gives the false impression that Guzman is dangerous. And Brazil is gearing up for Carnival. Even after a 2-year economic contraction, it won't stop revelers in Rio de Janeiro. Business is thriving at open-air markets and carnival stands as people pick up popular party items like masks and makeup. Carnival kicks off this Friday until next Saturday. Hundreds of thousands of tourists will descend on Rio to watch the parades and take part in processions. And with this, we've come to the end of this morning news brief. This and other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. Be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.